I woke up, trembling, cold sweat soaking through my pajamas, while the red numbers on the clock marked 3:17 in the morning. The presence was so palpable that I froze, lacking the courage to look at the corner of the room where a bluish light pulsated. This was no dream. Someone or something was there with me, and I knew my life would never be the same after what I was about to hear. For years I've hidden this experience, fearing being called crazy or fanatical. But the price of keeping this revelation became too heavy to bear. The knowledge about praying while sleeping that I received that early morning completely transformed my spiritual life, and now I understand it wasn't by chance. My name is Michael Thompson. I'm 52 years old, and I live in Colorado, United States. I'm an ordinary man, working as a civil engineer for over 2 decades, always trying to balance career, family, and faith. Before continuing with my testimony, please write in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know which countries this account is reaching. It gives me strength to continue sharing something so intimate and transformative. That night began like any other. I went to bed around 11, exhausted after a stressful day at work, where we had lost an important contract. My wife Sarah was already sleeping deeply beside me, and our children were in the next room. Our home, normally a refuge, seemed suffocating during that period. I'd been struggling with a growing sense of spiritual emptiness. For months, my prayers seemed to hit the ceiling and bounce back. The connection that was once so vivid had become mechanical. Empty words before sleeping, automatic thanks before meals. I attended church out of obligation, but inwardly, a dryness was taking over. I smiled at everyone, but inside, I wondered if God still cared about my existence. What nobody knew was that I had completely stopped praying 2 weeks earlier. What's the point? I thought. Life continued exactly the same, with or without my prayers. That night, I went to bed without even saying Amen. I was too tired to even pretend devotion. When I fell asleep, I dreamed I was walking down an endless corridor with countless closed doors. Each door I tried to open was locked. Frustration grew as I ran from one to another, desperate to find a way out. That's when I heard a distant voice calling my name. It wasn't threatening, but it carried authority. And then I woke up. But I wasn't really awake. I realized I was in that strange state between sleep and wakefulness, conscious but unable to fully move my body. And it was at that moment that I noticed the bluish light in the corner of the room. At first, I thought it was just the reflection from the clock or some electronic device. But the light grew, taking on contours that resembled a human silhouette. I tried to call Sarah, but my voice wouldn't come out. I tried to move, but it felt as if an enormous weight was pressing on my chest. Michael. The voice was masculine, deep, yet as soft as a breeze. It didn't come through my ears, but seemed to resonate directly in my mind. Do not be afraid. Gradually, the form became more defined. It was tall, radiant, with features that seemed to subtly change each time I tried to focus my gaze. Its eyes, however, remained constant, of such an intense blue that they seemed to contain entire galaxies. "Who are you?" I finally managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. "I am Raziel, sent to bring you a message." His voice didn't move the air, but I could feel it vibrate in every cell of my body. The initial fear began to dissipate, replaced by an overwhelming curiosity. It wasn't a malevolent presence, of that I was certain. The peace emanating from him was almost tangible, as if the very air in the room had been purified. Sarah continued sleeping peacefully beside me, completely oblivious to the extraordinary visitor occupying our bedroom. It was as if time had been suspended in that space between the three of us, me now fully awake, Sarah in her deep sleep, and Raziel neither completely material nor completely ethereal. "Why me?" I asked, the sincere doubt escaping before I could contain it. Raziel moved across the room without actually walking. It was more like he glided, the light surrounding him creating hypnotic patterns on the walls. "You have abandoned your prayers," he said, not as an accusation, but as a simple observation. I felt immediate shame, like a child caught in the act. They didn't seem to make a difference, I confessed. That's because you have only been praying when you're conscious. Raziel extended his hand, and in the center of his palm appeared what looked like a small sphere of pulsating light. The human spirit does not rest when the body sleeps. In fact, that's when it is most free. As he spoke, the sphere expanded, revealing images of people sleeping. Around each one, there was a colored aura that moved, as if in constant communication with something beyond normal vision. What you see is the spirit in communion during sleep, explained Raziel. Since the beginning of time, the Creator has spoken to humanity during sleep, when the barriers of the conscious mind are lowered. I remembered biblical stories, Joseph and his dreams, Daniel and his visions, even Joseph, the earthly father of Jesus, receiving guidance while asleep. But how can I pray while sleeping if I'm unconscious? I asked, perplexed by the concept. Raziel smiled, and the room seemed to light up even more. Prayer is not just words, Michael. It's a state of connection. When you prepare your spirit before sleep, you establish intentions that remain active while your body rests. It was then that Raziel revealed something to me that I had never heard in decades of Christian life, an ancient method to program the spirit to pray continuously during sleep. It wasn't complicated or mystical, but a simple practice that anyone could implement. 3 elements are necessary, he explained, raising 3 luminous fingers. Conscious gratitude, specific intention, and complete surrender before falling asleep. The sphere of light in his hand transformed, now showing images of what appeared to be ancient servants of God, practicing exactly what he was describing. First, deliberately thank for 3 specific blessings of the day, genuinely feeling the gratitude in every cell of your body, instructed Raziel. In the sphere, I saw people from different eras sitting on their beds, eyes closed, gentle smiles on their faces as they seemed to relive moments of joy. Next, establish a clear intention, not a selfish request, but an alignment with divine purposes. While I sleep, may my spirit intercede for, or may I receive wisdom about. Again, the sphere showed people formulating these intentional thoughts before lying down. Finally, complete surrender. Give your being, conscious and unconscious, to the divine will. This is the most powerful moment, when you remove your own interference and allow the Spirit to pray through you during the hours of sleep. I watched, fascinated, as the images showed what happened afterward. The same individual sleeping, but with intensified auras, pulsing in complex patterns that seemed to extend beyond the room, connecting to other points of light around the world. What am I seeing? I asked, unable to look away. The Sleeping Prayer Network, souls connected during sleep, interceding together without awareness of physical or temporal boundaries. It's one of the most powerful spiritual forces, but largely forgotten by modern humanity. I felt tears streaming down my face. It was so simple, so obvious, but I had never heard this in any sermon or Christian book. Why isn't this taught? Why don't we know about this? Raziel's face took on an expression that mixed sadness and compassion. There was a time when this knowledge was common among the faithful. The first followers of Christ practiced this daily. The sphere showed images of early Christians gathered in simple homes, sharing this practice with one another. But over time, as faith became institutionalized and ritualized, simpler and more intimate practices were set aside in favor of formalized liturgies. The knowledge wasn't deliberately hidden. It simply ceased to be transmitted. I saw the progression through the centuries, medieval monasteries where some monks still maintained the practice, small groups of believers during the Reformation rediscovering aspects of this knowledge, until reaching the present day, where only a few isolated individuals seem to understand the power of praying while sleeping. The modern mind has become obsessed with active consciousness, with control, continued Raziel. The idea that the most significant spiritual work can occur while one sleeps contradicts the human pride of always being in command. This made immediate sense to me. My own frustration with unanswered prayers came precisely from this mindset. I wanted to see immediate, controlled, measurable results. The idea that my spirit could be working on a completely different level while I slept was revolutionary. But you didn't come just to teach me a technique, I suddenly realized. There's something more, isn't there? Raziel's eyes shone even more intensely. You understand well. Time is accelerating, Michael. The veil between the realms is thinning. More people need to rediscover this ancient connection. The sphere in Raziel's hand expanded again, now showing a panoramic view of the planet. I saw small points of light. People practicing sleep prayer without even knowing the name of what they were doing. These are the ones who naturally discovered the method, guided by intuition or personal experiences, he explained, but they are few and scattered. Then the image changed, showing what it would be like if thousands, millions of people practiced consciously. The network of light intensified dramatically, creating an intricate pattern that enveloped the entire Earth. What you are seeing is a spiritual shield, a protection woven by spirits in prayer during sleep. In ancient times, entire cities were protected when their inhabitants prayed while sleeping. I thought of all the times I had read about angels guarding cities, about divine protection over entire peoples. I had never considered that this could be connected to the spiritual practices of ordinary people during their sleep. We are entering a time when this shield will be needed again, continued Raziel, his voice now more serious. Forces invisible to human eyes are moving. The battle for hearts and minds intensifies every day. I felt a shiver run down my spine. It wasn't a vague threat. I could feel the urgency in his words. That's why you were chosen, Michael. Not because you are special or holier than others, but because your heart, despite your recent doubts, is still open enough to receive this message. What should I do? I asked, feeling the weight of the responsibility being placed upon me. Share, said Raziel simply. Share this knowledge. Begin by practicing yourself, then teach Sarah, your children, then, as you feel guided, to others. He made a gesture with his hand, and the sphere transformed again, showing a sequence of future events. Me explaining the practice to my family, then to some close friends, eventually to larger groups. It won't be easy, warned Raziel. Some will reject it immediately, calling it mysticism or superstition. Others will accept it intellectually but never practice it. But those whose spirits recognize the truth will feel as if they are remembering something they always knew, not learning something new. I saw myself facing resistance, even ridicule in some cases, but also witnessing extraordinary transformations in people who adopted the practice. How will I know who is ready to hear? I asked. You will feel it, replied Raziel, and in moments of doubt, ask during your own preparation time for sleep prayer. Guidance will come. I remembered something that had intrigued me since the beginning of this encounter. Why did you visit me at 3:17 in the morning? Does it have any special significance? Raziel smiled again. Colossians 3:17. And whatever you do in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. This verse contains the essence of the practice: gratitude, intentional action, and recognition of the divine source. I was impressed by the precision. It wasn't a coincidence. Nothing about this encounter was. Raziel came closer, his light now completely enveloping me. Before I depart, I must show you the power of this practice in your own life. He lightly touched my forehead, and instantly I was transported to what seemed to be a future version of myself. I saw myself sleeping, but my spirit, a luminous version of me, was active, in deep communion. I saw prayers being answered, not in spectacular ways, but in small daily synchronicities, in received wisdom, in inexplicable peace in the face of difficult circumstances. I saw myself waking up in the morning with insights I didn't possess when falling asleep, with clear directions for situations that seemed impossible the night before. I saw relationships healed, not by my conscious words, but by the invisible work of my spirit, connected to something greater during sleep. This is your potential, said Raziel as I returned to the present reality of my room and the potential of anyone who rediscovers this ancient practice. Tears were freely flowing down my face now. Years of spiritual frustration, of seemingly unanswered prayers, of feeling disconnected, all of this could have been avoided if I had known that my approach was incomplete. "I'm ready," I said with a choked voice. "I will teach what I've learned." Raziel nodded, satisfied. "Always remember, prayer doesn't end when you close your eyes to sleep. In fact, that's when it becomes most powerful." Friends who are watching me now since that night, my life has completely changed. I began practicing the 3-step method every night: specific gratitude, clear intention, and complete surrender before sleep. In the first few days, I didn't notice anything dramatic, just a more peaceful sleep and a feeling of peace upon waking. But after 2 weeks, I began to notice remarkable changes. I would wake up with solutions to problems that had been tormenting me for months. Tense relationships began to improve without conscious effort on my part. A sense of purpose and clarity began to permeate my days. Most impressive, however, was when I began to share this practice with others. My wife Sarah, initially skeptical, became the biggest enthusiast after experiencing it for herself. Our children, even being teenagers with their natural resistance to parental suggestions, noticed how their school anxieties decreased and their dreams became more meaningful. I ask you who are watching me. How many hours do you spend sleeping every night? 6, 7, 8 hours? Imagine if all that time, which constitutes approximately 1/3 of your life, could be not just physical rest, but also deep spiritual work. Imagine waking up not only with a renewed body, but with a strengthened spirit. I'm not talking about controlling dreams or complicated meditation techniques. I'm talking about a simple act of preparation before sleep that allows your spirit to work while you rest. Have you ever experienced receiving a clear answer to a problem right upon waking? Have you felt that you went to sleep with a problem and woke up with the solution? This is no coincidence. It's your spirit working while your body rests. And for those who are wondering if this is biblical, remember that the scriptures are filled with examples of God speaking through dreams. From Joseph in the Old Testament to Joseph, the earthly father of Jesus, in the New Testament, God consistently used the state of sleep to communicate profound truth. If this testimony touched your heart in any way, share it with someone who might be struggling with their prayer life. You never know who might need exactly this message at this moment. And speaking of important messages, in the next video, I'll share something that the angel Raziel revealed to me about the connection between guardian angels and specific moments of the day. A revelation that completely changed my understanding of spiritual protection and the cycles of time. It's something that has never been taught in churches, but is hidden in the scriptures for those with eyes to see. Right, I want to know more in the comments, so I know you're interested in this surprising revelation about celestial guardians. See you soon, and remember, your spiritual life doesn't stop when you close your eyes. In fact, that's when it truly begins. After that extraordinary night with Raziel, I couldn't wait to begin implementing what I'd learned. The very next evening, I sat on the edge of my bed, took a deep breath, and started the first step: conscious gratitude. I deliberately focused on 3 specific blessings from that day: a productive meeting at work, my daughter's laughter during dinner, and the beautiful sunset I'd witnessed on my drive home. Instead of just mentally listing them, I allowed myself to genuinely feel the gratitude, reliving each moment until warmth spread through my chest. Next came the specific intention. That first night, I kept it simple. While I sleep, may my spirit receive clarity about the Johnson project at work. We had been struggling with this particular contract for weeks, and conventional solutions weren't working. It felt slightly strange to verbalize this intention, almost like I was programming my unconscious mind before sleep. Finally, the surrender, The part I found most challenging. For someone accustomed to maintaining control, the idea of completely surrendering my conscious and unconscious self was uncomfortable. "I release my spirit to your will," I whispered, trying to genuinely mean it. "Work through me as I sleep." I'll admit I felt slightly foolish that first night. Part of me wondered if I'd imagined the entire angelic encounter, if stress and exhaustion had simply created an elaborate hallucination. Nevertheless, I completed the 3 steps and laid my head on the pillow, uncertain of what to expect. The first few nights were anticlimactic. I slept more peacefully, true, but there were no dramatic revelations or divine downloads of information. I continued the practice faithfully, though, reminding myself that spiritual disciplines often required consistency before results became apparent. On the 5th night, something shifted. I had set my intention to receive guidance about a family conflict. My brother and I hadn't spoken in months following a disagreement over our parents' estate. That night, I had a vivid dream of us as children, playing in our backyard, completely free of adult complications and resentments. When I woke up, I had an overwhelming urge to call him, not to discuss the disagreement, but simply to reconnect as brothers. The call lasted nearly an hour, neither of us mentioning the estate issue. Somehow that conversation opened a door, and within weeks, the dispute that had seemed insurmountable found its natural resolution. Was it coincidence? Perhaps. But it was the first of many such coincidences that would follow as I continued the practice. After about 2 weeks of practicing sleep prayer, the changes in my demeanor became noticeable enough that Sarah finally asked what was different about me. I hesitated at first, worried about sounding delusional if I mentioned an angelic visitation. Instead, I simply shared that I had been experimenting with a different approach to prayer before sleep. "What kind of approach?" she asked, understandably curious. I explained the 3 steps as practically as possible, framing it as an ancient practice I had researched rather than revealing its supernatural source. Sarah listened politely but with visible skepticism. As a pediatric nurse with a scientific mindset, she tended to approach spiritual matters with a healthy dose of pragmatism. "So you're basically setting intentions before sleep," she summarized. "That's not so different from what they teach in some mindfulness practices." I agreed, grateful for her non-dismissive response, even if she didn't fully embrace the spiritual dimension of what I was describing. "Would you be willing to try it for a week?" I asked. "Just as an experiment." She agreed, more out of support for my enthusiasm than personal conviction. That night I guided her through the steps, and she followed along, her scientific curiosity engaged, if nothing else. 3 nights later, Sarah woke me at 2 a.m., her eyes wide with astonishment. "You won't believe this," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I just had the most vivid dream about my patient, the little boy with the undiagnosed condition we've been struggling with for months. In the dream, I was shown his medical chart, but with a diagnosis I've never considered before, a rare metabolic disorder that perfectly fits his symptoms, MAHI. The next day, she suggested the possibility to the attending physician, who ordered the relevant tests. A week later, the results confirmed Sarah's dream diagnosis. The child began appropriate treatment and showed immediate improvement after months of decline. From that moment, Sarah became not just a participant, but a champion of the practice. Her analytical mind began keeping a journal of her intentions before sleep and the insights or experiences that followed upon waking. Her conversion from skeptic to believer lent tremendous credibility when we eventually began sharing the practice with others. As Raziel had shown me in his vision, I began by teaching the practice to our immediate family. Our teenage children, Alex and Emma, responded differently. 16-year-old Alex approached it with typical adolescent skepticism, but agreed to try it before important exams. When he experienced unusually clear recall of material he had studied only briefly, he became a reluctant but regular practitioner. 14-year-old Emma embraced it immediately, her naturally spiritual nature making the concept of prayer during sleep intuitively sensible to her. She reported vivid dreams and emotional healing experiences within the first week. From our family, the ripple expanded to close friends. Initially just two couples we had known for years and with whom we shared a weekly Bible study. Again, the responses varied. Some embraced it immediately, others approached it cautiously, and a few dismissed it entirely as unbiblical innovation. One couple, the Mitchells, had been struggling with infertility for years. After practicing sleep prayer for 3 months, focusing their intentions on openness to God's plan for their family, they reported a profound shift in their perspective. Though they remained childless, they described a peace about their situation they had never experienced before. 6 months later, they began the adoption process, something they had previously resisted. Word began to spread beyond our immediate circle. I was asked to speak at small gatherings, then larger ones. As Raziel had warned, the reactions were mixed. Some church leaders embraced the concept, finding scriptural support in the many biblical instances of divine communication during sleep. Others criticized it as mystical, New Age, or even potentially dangerous. I found myself becoming an unexpected advocate for a spiritual practice I had only recently discovered. Each night, during my own practice, I would include the intention to be guided to those who were ready to receive this knowledge. Doors began opening in surprising ways. About 6 months after my encounter with Raziel, I was invited to speak at a conference on spirituality and neuroscience. A colleague at work had connections to this interdisciplinary group and had mentioned my research into sleep and prayer. Nervous but intrigued, I accepted the invitation. Preparing for this presentation forced me to examine the practice from a scientific perspective. I discovered fascinating research on sleep states, brain activity during meditation, and the growing field of neurospiritual studies. While none of it directly addressed prayer during sleep, as Raziel had described it, there was substantial evidence that the brain processed emotional and spiritual content differently during various sleep stages. Studies had shown that intentions set before sleep could influence dream content and problem-solving during sleep. The brain continued processing emotional and intellectual challenges during rest, often leading to the familiar experience of sleeping on a problem and waking with a solution. At the conference, I presented a carefully worded description of the 3-step practice, framing it as an ancient spiritual technique with potential modern applications. I avoided mentioning angelic encounters, instead focusing on the practical components and potential benefits. To my surprise, the scientific community received it with genuine interest. A neuroscientist approached me afterward, explaining that my description aligned with her research on theta and delta brainwave states during deep meditation and sleep. The brain is more receptive to certain types of processing during these states, she explained. What you're describing as spiritual connection could have neurological correlates that facilitate problem-solving, emotional processing, and creative insights. A sleep researcher suggested collaborating on a small pilot study to measure the effects of the practice on sleep quality and problem-solving abilities. While his interest was purely scientific, I saw it as another avenue for spreading this knowledge beyond religious circles. This scientific validation provided an unexpected bridge to people who might have dismissed a purely spiritual approach. By understanding both the spiritual essence and the potential neurological mechanisms, I could speak to a broader audience about the practice. As the practice spread and gained attention, opposition inevitably emerged. The most vocal came from 2 directions: religious traditionalists who viewed any practice not explicitly outlined in Scripture with suspicion, and secular skeptics who dismissed all spiritual practices as superstition. One prominent pastor published a blog post warning his congregation against what he called mystical sleep manipulation, suggesting it opened practitioners to demonic influence. He cited verses warning against divination and seeking supernatural experiences outside prescribed biblical methods. Initially, these criticisms stung deeply. I found myself doubting, wondering if I had been deceived or if I was leading others astray. During these periods of doubt, I would return to the practice itself, setting the intention before sleep to receive clarity about the path forward. One such night, after facing particularly harsh criticism from a former friend and fellow church member, I surrendered my confusion and hurt before falling asleep. In my dream that night, I found myself in a vast library. An elderly man, not Raziel, but someone equally luminous, guided me to various ancient texts showing the practice described in different cultures and religious traditions throughout history. Truth is not confined to what has been preserved in your particular tradition, the guide explained. Look for the fruit, not just the form. Upon waking, I felt a renewed confidence. I began researching historical Christian contemplative practices and discovered references to similar approaches in the writings of Desert Fathers, medieval mystics, and even in journals of revival leaders. The practice wasn't new, it had simply been forgotten or neglected in modern efficiency-focused spirituality. Armed with this historical context, I developed a more robust response to critics. I didn't engage in theological debates, but simply invited skeptics to test the spirits by trying the practice themselves and evaluating the results in their own lives. Some who had been most vocal in their criticism became quiet supporters after private experimentation. Others maintained their opposition, but their arguments held less power over me as I witnessed the positive transformations in those who embraced the practice. About a year after my encounter with Raziel, something remarkable began to happen. I started receiving emails and messages from people I had never met, from countries I had never visited, describing practices nearly identical to what I had been teaching. Some had discovered it through word of mouth from those who had heard me speak. Others seemed to have stumbled upon it independently or learned it through their own cultural or religious traditions. A woman from the Philippines described a practice her grandmother had taught her, passed down through generations, involving setting intentions before sleep to receive guidance. A monk from Thailand shared how a similar practice had been part of his Buddhist training. A Native American elder reached out to describe traditions of dream incubation that paralleled the three-step method in remarkable ways. These connections reminded me of what Raziel had shown in his sphere, small points of light around the world, practitioners who had discovered the method through various paths. It seemed the knowledge was emerging simultaneously in different places, as if the time had come for its widespread rediscovery. I began facilitating online groups where practitioners from different countries and traditions could share their experiences. The similarities in their accounts were striking. The same sense of expanded awareness during sleep, the same pattern of receiving insights or solutions upon waking, the same sense of spiritual connection and protection extending beyond themselves. Some reported experiences that went beyond what I had personally witnessed. A group in Brazil described coordinated sleep prayer, where several members focused on the same intention before sleep and reported shared dream experiences or synchronized insights upon waking. A hospice chaplain shared how teaching the practice to dying patients had transformed their fear of death into peaceful anticipation, many reporting visits from spiritual guides during their sleep in their final days. As these accounts accumulated, I began to understand more fully what Raziel had meant by the network of sleeping prayer, souls connected during sleep, interceding together without awareness of physical or temporal boundaries. What might have sounded like mystical fantasy a year earlier now seemed like a natural extension of what I was witnessing. While the external spread of the practice was remarkable, the most profound changes occurred in my own inner life. The person I had been before Raziel's visit, spiritually frustrated, secretly doubting, going through religious motions, seemed like a stranger to me now. My daily life became infused with a subtle awareness of spiritual reality that hadn't been present before. Synchronicities increased, meaningful coincidences that couldn't be easily dismissed as random chance. I found myself bumping into exactly the right person at the right moment, or having exactly the resource someone needed without knowing in advance they would need it. Dreams took on new significance. While not every night brought profound visions, I experienced regular cycles of meaningful dream experiences that provided guidance, healing, or insights. Some mornings I would wake with complete clarity about situations that had seemed hopelessly complex the night before. My relationship with Sarah deepened as we shared this spiritual journey. Our conversations about our respective sleep prayer experiences became a point of intimate connection. We developed a practice of sharing our intentions before sleep and our insights upon waking, creating a beautiful synchronicity in our spiritual lives. The most unexpected change was in my relationship with doubt itself. Before, I had seen doubt as the enemy of faith, something to be suppressed or overcome. Now I recognized it as a natural part of spiritual growth. I could hold questions without anxiety, trusting that understanding would come in its time, often during the receptive state of sleep. When I encountered new challenges or decisions, my default response shifted from worry to peaceful anticipation. I would take the question into my sleep prayer practice, surrendering it completely, and watch with fascination as clarity emerged, sometimes immediately, sometimes gradually over days or weeks, but almost always with a sense of rightness that transcended mere intellectual problem-solving. As my practice deepened and the network of practitioners grew, I began to understand another dimension of what Raziel had shown me, the protective spiritual shield created by those praying during sleep. This manifested in my experience not as dramatic supernatural intervention, but as a subtle sense of being guided away from harmful situations or decisions. There were small instances, inexplicably deciding to take a different route home, and later learning about an accident on my usual path, or feeling a strong urge to call a friend who, it turned out, was in the midst of a crisis and needed support. These could be dismissed as coincidence by skeptics, but their cumulative pattern suggested something more. More significantly, our family experienced a period of unusual protection during a tumultuous time in our community. A series of layoffs at my company somehow passed over my department despite early indicators that we would be heavily impacted. Our children navigated a difficult period at their school, where substance abuse and negative peer pressure were increasing, yet seemed naturally drawn to positive influences without our direct intervention. I began to notice similar patterns in the lives of committed practitioners in our growing community. It wasn't that difficulties never occurred. Life remained challenging in many ways, but there seemed to be a buffer against the most destructive possibilities, a gentle guidance toward life-giving rather than life-diminishing paths. One of the most remarkable instances involved our church community during a natural disaster. Severe flooding hit our region, causing widespread damage. Our church building, located in an area that historically flooded badly, suffered minimal impact despite being directly in the path of the highest water levels. The meteorologist who surveyed the damage called it inexplicable how the water had seemingly diverted around the property. What few people knew was that a group within the church had been practicing sleep prayer together for months, with a regular intention for protection and blessing over the community. Was this scientific proof of the protective shield Raziel had described? No, but it added to the growing body of experiences that confirmed the reality of what he had shown me. It's been 3 years since that extraordinary night when Raziel appeared in my bedroom. What began as a personal revelation has blossomed into a movement that extends far beyond anything I could have orchestrated or imagined. The practice of sleep prayer continues to spread, crossing denominational, religious, and cultural boundaries, finding resonance with people from all walks of life. I've learned that my role is not to control this movement, but to serve as a faithful witness to what I experienced and learned. Some days, the responsibility feels overwhelming. Other days, I'm filled with wonder at being part of something so much larger than myself. The scientific study I mentioned earlier, was completed and published in a peer-reviewed journal on sleep research. While carefully worded to avoid religious terminology, it documented statistically significant improvements in sleep quality, problem-solving ability, emotional regulation, and subjective well-being among practitioners of what the researchers termed intentional sleep programming. And this opened doors to more secular audiences who might never have considered a spiritually framed practice. Meanwhile, theological discussions about the practice have matured. Several respected religious scholars have published thoughtful analyses, finding historical and scriptural support for the concept of spiritual activity during sleep. While controversy remains in some circles, the conversation has shifted from dismissal to nuanced consideration. As for my personal journey, it continues to unfold. I haven't had another visitation as dramatic as Raziel's appearance, but I sense guidance and presence regularly through the practice he taught me. My understanding of what happens during sleep prayer continues to deepen and evolve as I witness its effects in my own life and the lives of others. The most beautiful outcome has been the community that has formed around this practice. People from different backgrounds, traditions, and life experiences united by a shared commitment to intentional spiritual connection during the hours we spend in sleep. We gather periodically, in person and online, to share experiences, support one another, and focus collective intentions on healing and positive change in our world.